Israelis concerned about Syrian army progress. The Zionist entity seems in a rush to directly intervene in Syria and strike the Iranian nuclear facilities. In a recent statement to the Zionist military and intelligence officials, the new achievements of the Syrian army reflected concerns amongst the officials in Israel and accelerated the pace of the incitement against Syria. It says here, the conference of the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv on Monday has turned to be an occasion for sending letters that reflected the deep Zionist concerns about developments in Syria after the latest achievements carried out by the Syrian regular army against the militant groups. Expressed fears of the international community's silence towards what's going on in Syria, stressing that Syrian regular army used chemical weapons several times. The Zionist analysts believe that the purpose behind those statements is to push the U.S. towards a military adventure against the regime in Syria. Says this is because if it appears that Assad has used chemical weapons, the U.S. will be ought to intervene, which will represent a Zionist attempt to push Washington towards military intervention in Syria. Lebanese Salafists call for jihad in Syria. Two Lebanese Salafist sheikhs called Monday for a jihad to defend Sunnis in war-ravaged Syria following what they said was Hezbollah's involvement in the Syrian fighting on the side of President Assad's forces. That's right. We were just covering that last week about Hezbollah supposedly being involved in it. And that's what they go on here and talk about. They're concerned about the threats coming from Iran and criticizing Russia for supporting and giving aid and stuff. Then we have Lebanese president calls to send fighters to Syria. He said he called on the Lebanese to abide by the disassociation policy and not to send arms shipments or fighters to the neighboring country, Syria. They've officially followed the policy to distance the country from the Syrian conflict, but they have also been reluctant to publicly blame militants for fire hitting northern villages and towns near the border with Syria, which they usually blame on the government. It says here on the Syrian government, U.S. looks to allies to secure Arabian Gulf. Mr. Panetta, Leon Panetta, was paying tribute to the deepening ties with the Gulf states. So it goes on here and it says here that they had talks in Washington with the Emir of Qatar, with President Obama. That also says that the relations between Washington and the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council are strong. Panetta was quick to add on Monday evening that they are evolving. It's pretty interesting. It is our hope that the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, can play an important role in the future providing security for the region. Well, actually, Qatar and them are what? They're actually creating instability in the region. U.S. doubts Israel's claims of Syrian chemical weapons use, so Kerry pushes for more rebel aid anyhow. So in a world where Israel said so, it is often seen as the only proof needed. U.S. officials are expressing an unusual level of doubt today, saying that they are not persuaded by Israeli claims Syria has used chemical weapons. Magnetic bomb kills Syria Electricity Minister, says senior official at the Syria's Electricity Ministry has been killed by a magnetic bomb attached to his car by the foreign-backed militants. Says here that the 11th century minaret of a famous mosque that towered over the narrow stone alleyways of Aleppo's old quarter collapsed Wednesday as the terrorists and government troops fought pitched battles in the streets around it, depriving the ancient city of one of its most important landmarks. So these people that they are supporting, like I said, they're looting to fund their terrorist activities along with kidnapping. So, and they're actually blowing up mosques and Christian churches, and they're doing it and posting it to LiveLeak. So it's not a big mystery as to who's behind it. Fate of clerics held in Syria is disputed. So a Christian advocacy group says here on the television network Al Jazeera reported the release on Tuesday of two Syrian archbishops that had been seized on a road trip by the terrorists or the rebels, but others said the archbishops were still held by unidentified kidnappers in a day of conflicting accounts. So Syrian Electronic Army says it hacked AP Twitter account. So Twitter suspended the AP account after hackers sent a tweet from it on Tuesday that said, "Breaking, 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured." So says Jay Carney confirms the president is fine and confirms that the account was hacked. Last week, NPR and NPR's Twitter accounts were also hacked. They also took credit for hacking CBS's website and Twitter accounts over the weekend. Dow plunges 160 points after hacked AP tweets about explosions at White House. 160 points. Yeah, the West, they usually like playing games like that, using the media to their advantage. I wonder how they're going to like that. Israel gets weapons to take on Iran. Cliff Notes says here Syrian chemical weapons proof. U.S. military aid packages and U.S. boots on the ground in Jordan. Everything's lining up against Syria and Iran. Chief of Staff of Israeli Defense Forces recently pushed back against the idea that it was too late for Israel to act alone, basically in attacking Iran, saying that they have the capability of attacking the nuclear installations by itself. He felt comfortable making it because he knew that in a few days he would be welcoming a friend bearing gifts. Chuck Hagel. They're gifts of the, it says here, well, they are gifts the Iranian regime would prefer Israel didn't possess. Advanced radar packages and KC-135 refueling tanks, V-22 Osprey tilt rotor, basically helicopters. Jordan's been slammed for aiding al-Qaeda to enter Syria. The Iranian military's top brass has criticized Jordan for facilitating the infiltration into Syria by al-Qaeda terrorists, saying opening Jordan's borders to al-Qaeda to massacre people in Syria has sharply reduced the credibility of the country in the eyes of Muslims. And just like Qatari, Jordan is doing what they're doing to basically their reasoning or defense is that they're trying to maintain stability and not letting terrorists come in their country. Well, they're making it worse. Like I said, just like the Gulf states that are supporting this. While the Arab League considers the Syrian issue to be a political one, Jordan's military actions strain the Arab world and threaten the interests of the Muslim Ummah. FBI entraps U.S. citizen attempting to join U.S.-funded al-Qaeda in Syria. Increasingly bizarre U.S. terror racket inspires human misery from Boston to Damascus. It's the latest entrapment patsy. Dismisser Tunisia, a U.S. citizen attempted to join al-Qaeda's Syrian franchise al-Nusra. The irony is that he was charged with attempting to provide material to support a foreign terrorist organization. The U.S. State Department has announced an additional $123 million in aid to these very same terrorists. Hundreds of Europeans are fighting in Syria, says EU expert. EU's anti-terror chief said hundreds of Europeans are now fighting the government of Syrian President Assad. This is interesting because we've covered this before about in Germany, also what was it, France maybe, or England? Yeah, it was England and Germany, probably France as well. But that now they're concerned. See, they're aiding all these terrorists. They started in Libya. They probably started far before that with Afghanistan or Iraq. But they radicalized them. They funded them. These are all quote citizens or at least residents of these countries, these European countries. And now all of a sudden they're worried about them coming back and being well trained and carrying out jihad against them. So not all of them are radical when they leave, but most likely many of them will be radicalized there, will be trained. So he says, and we've seen this might lead to a serious threat when they get back. The UK, Ireland, France are among the EU countries estimated the highest numbers of fighters in Syria. Jews, Gentiles, not equals in Israel. The head rabbi of the Israeli military brigadier general, Mr. Peretz, believes non-Jews should not have equal rights with Jews in Israel. He said the idea of giving non-Jews equal rights goes against the principles of the Torah, and the government representatives have no authority to go against the Torah's teachings. So I've covered this before about how there's been right-wing groups, not just right-wing groups, but specifically National Socialists in Europe that's been growing, mostly in Greece, of course, the Golden Dawn Party, but in France and elsewhere. And then I saw this over the weekend. Bulgarian soccer fans fined $24,000, almost $25,000 for displaying pro-Hitler banners. So they displayed banners with swastikas in praise of Adolf Hitler during a recent game of the country's football federation. It also called on the club to slap a 2-year stadium ban on the authors of the incidents. It says it's not the first time the club, currently second in the league table, has been sanctioned for racism and violence. So it's funny because I pointed that video out to somebody, say, see, this is kind of a growing thing out there, not justifying it, but this is something that's going on. There are definite concerns about immigration and unemployment, and the person I showed it to was kind of shocked that they were doing this. Like, well, how are they able to do this? How are they doing this? And of course, I saw this article come out then today. It's basically saying that they were fined a bunch of money. So there you go. Growing support among Russians for Lenin burial. It says people across Russia have been celebrating the 143rd birthday of Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin, and 2 revelers in a northern Russia village went too far and ended up beheading a statue of the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution. The offenders then took the severed statue's head to a local police station. It says, like many in the modern-day Russia who still consider Lenin's role in history as positive, the latest opinion polls shows 57% of Russians see Lenin in a good light. More than half of them consider him a good person, and getting on for 2/3 think his birthday on April 22nd is worth remembering. It says more than 60% of Russians would like to see Lenin's body properly buried. The U.S. miscalculated just how much North Korea would react to war games. The recent U.S. war games in the Korean Peninsula were primarily aimed at provoking North Korea into action. See, that's pretty much what I've been saying here. Washington seems to have underestimated what could be Pyongyang's response, says a Japan-based journalist, James Corbett. So we have here the first combat ship arrives in Singapore. That's a wicked-looking thing. Says here the U.S. Navy's first littoral combat ship, the USS Freedom, arrived in Singapore on Thursday to officially begin its maiden overseas deployment. NYPD teams up with U.S. laboratory to study airborne weapons. So the New York Police Department is teaming up with national laboratories to study how chemical weapons could be dispersed through the air into a subway system. So they'll track the movement of a harmless tracer gases. So they say it's to study how they can help safeguard the city against attacks. Well, we know that these attacks and PSYOPs and different types of operations will take place, no matter what, false flag operations. They will take place, no matter how much they put up here, as far as this preventative stuff. So they're just trying to study how they can get away with it, most likely. Fracking truck triggers radiation alarm while trying to enter landfill. A truck carrying drill cuttings from a fracking site was turned away from a landfill in Pennsylvania on Friday after it triggered a radiation alarm. It says it had a low level of radiation. So remember, low level radiation is acceptable, right? So at least that's what they tell us. Witness gives details of his role in BP oil spill cover-up. A former boat captain, Mr. Coco, has come forward to reveal his role in setting fires in the Gulf following the 2010 BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. He details how local shrimp boats were hired to corral the oil, after which homemade bombs would ignite the oil, creating fires the size of city blocks. He was given no physical protection during the operation, only a fire jumpsuit. He also reveals apparent collusion between Coast Guard and BP. Viruses from sewage contaminate deep well water. From Chemical and Engineering News, says scientists once thought that pathogens could not reach drinking water wells sunk into deep, protected groundwater aquifers. Nevertheless, over the past decade, researchers have identified diarrhea-causing viruses at a handful of deep bedrock well sites in the U.S. and Europe. So a report goes into where these viruses may have originated. The viruses appear to seep from sewer pipes and then swiftly penetrate drinking water wells. It says the EPA does not regulate the presence of viruses in drinking water, so many public water systems do not routinely test for them. So if you drink tap water, you might want to stop. And those that think that because your town or your whatever doesn't fluoridate water and stuff like that, you're still going to be getting fluoride. That's the shitty part. Flood and pharmaceutical drugs. Flooding rivers imperil the heartland. Mississippi River projected to peak 11 feet above flood stage. So before they had barges that were bottoming out because it was, the water was so low. Now it's this. And believe it or not, this is no beautiful sandy beach. It says it's a farm field. Crop of barley ruined by tons of sand blown across Britain finally warms up. It's the second round of sandstorms and devastating crops. So this is what it looks like, and this is what it's supposed to look like. Sandstorms will cost farmers tens of thousands of pounds. House Democrats wonder why GOP won't agree to debate on climate change. Well, I wonder why. New discovery says NASA study proves carbon dioxide cools the atmosphere. So it throws the space agency into conflict with its climatologists after new NASA measurements prove that carbon dioxide acts as a coolant in the Earth's atmosphere. I'm going to keep moving for time's sake. Links will be posted. Basically, greenhouse gases actually block up to 95% of harmful solar rays from reaching our planet, thus reducing the heating impact on the sun. Chemtrails are aerosols, geoengineering, and obvious overhead pollutant ignored and denied. They're loaded with heavy metals that have been measured in the water and air. And they include arsenic, aluminum, chromium. These toxic chemicals have a mental, physiological, emotional functioning of the target human population to subvert the individual's sense of control over their own thinking, behavior, and emotions and decision-making. Spraying has transformed the atmosphere that the human population breathes into plasma, but it's also fueling Venus syndrome or a warming effect.